In a previous video on Obsidian, I walked you through how I read Plato's Crito to generate an outline and notes. See the previous video for that. I said that I would show you how to approach a more modern work. What I'm going to show you today is actually how I approach taking notes on all modern nonfiction in Obsidian. That being said, the most important difference between this video and the last is probably not that the book is modern, but that it comes with an outline. The edition of Crito I used came with none, so I had to generate it based on the reading. In this book today, the author gives us an outline, so we will start with that. What book are we using? Ancient Greece by Thomas R. Martin. And even though I followed the process that I'm showing you for... What book are we using? Ancient Greece by Thomas R. Martin. And even though I followed the process that I'm showing you today for the whole book, we will focus on chapter 8, as that has information about Socrates, which is what we talked about last time. So now we're back in Obsidian. Let's start by creating a note for the book. And so I already have a sources folder. I can create it by saying something like Martin, Ancient Greece. Now that this is done, we can add any information here at the top that we might find interesting. You know what? We just had the picture up on the screen a second ago. And so let me grab that and put this in the note. I could actually copy this image and put it directly in, or I could take it right here and just embed it. Let me show you how to do that. So we can create a link to something external, like so. Here is the URL to that image that I got off the internet. Here we can put a note saying something like Martin, Ancient Greece. We're actually not going to see this. So we've got a link, and if we were to click on this, it would actually open the image. I actually don't want that. I want to see the image. You can embed linked items into the notes by putting an exclamation point there at the beginning. So now that we have the cover, let's actually jump into the content. The first thing I'm going to start off with is the short outline. Now for each chapter, I'll create a heading for that chapter name and an outline with the author subheadings in italics with page numbers like this. We're starting with chapter 8 because this is where he starts talking about Socrates. And so you can see here we have the subheadings, and then I have page numbers next to all of those subheadings. So that's step 1. And so that means I'm going to go through the book, write these down in my notes, and put in those page numbers. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through the chapter and add notes to the short outline. Of course, this will take a little while, so I will just copy in some notes, but it might end up looking something like this. So there we go. Our short outline is now a longer outline with notes. Now, I didn't put all my notes in. You'll notice here more things, and so forth, because the actual note I made is quite a bit longer than this. So now, because of these notes, I can glance through everything. I can also, if I want more information, I can say, ooh, I want to read more about the career of Socrates. This is a very short explanation. I'm sure they said more. And so I can go to page 214 within the book and go review more if I want to do so. But now that we've read through the chapter, I'm going to stop and talk about something that I would have done actually while I was reading the chapter. And so we've got these notes here, right? This is useful as it is, because this is something good for reviewing. What I would actually do while I'm doing these notes is to go through and link to other material, or sometimes extract and make notes on specific things within this particular content, just like we did last time for Plato's Crito. So what might I link? Well, I already have a note for Socrates, and so it would totally make sense as I'm going through here to link to that. And so if I just look in here and say Socrates. There's the first mention of Socrates, and I will just surround that with square brackets. And so now it becomes a link to our note. Okay, what else might I do? Well, there's a fellow in here named Alcibiades. He's a really important Athenian. And so he is also someone I might make a note about, because you'll see him a lot, and you'll see him in Plato's dialogues, for example, if you read more of those. So I'm going to take Alcibiades, I'm going to put double brackets around that, and go back to my notes over here on the left, and create a note for Alcibiades. So now, every time I link to Alcibiades, I will be able to see over in my linked mentions over here on the right, everywhere that Alcibiades shows up. But I'll also be able to see, if I go back to Socrates, now I see that Socrates is linked from Plato's Crito and from Crito of Alopis, two notes we created last time. But now he's also linked from the Martin textbook. What else would we make notes out of? Well, if we go back here, one thing that I commonly make notes on would be locations. And I'll often put in like a picture of a map or something. Let's take, for example, the causes of the Peloponnesian War up here at the top. One of the causes was Athens' support of Corcyra in their dispute with Corinth. Corcyra was a colony of Corinth, and Athens was trying to help them against Corinth, and this is one of the causes. And so where is Corcyra? Well, I'm going to go look. So I'm back here in my browser. I'm just going to do a search. I'm going to get images.google.com and search for map Corcyra. And I'll find all sorts of options. What I'm going to do is I'm going to find one that I think will work really well for this particular note. I can look around and say, okay, Corcyra is over here. It is, in fact, on this map, and that's useful. Maybe I want one that'll have less information on it, so I'll be able to see it a little bit better. And I kind of like this one right here because this particular image has Corcyra on it, and also the main characters in this aspect of the Peloponnesian War. We've got Corinth and Athens and Sparta. Sparta, of course, being the one who led the Peloponnesian coalition in that particular war. Okay, so I need this. One thing I can do is I can just take a screenshot. You can also just save this as a file and just drag it into the vault. By taking a screenshot, this is super easy for me. I've done that. Now that I've got that in memory, I can go in and say, all right, let's create a note. New note. Corcyra. I didn't really mean to minimize that. So here's my note, and I'm just going to paste. And so Obsidian will allow you just to paste images in, which is great. And when you do that, you're going to get this pasted image with a date string, and that's not really great to have as a file name. So if I actually go to that image, which is right here, I can rename it. So let's see, rename and map including Corcyra, Athens, Sparta, and Corinth. So I did the rename. Now that I'm like executing, like I hit tab, and now what it's doing is it's saying, hey, do you want to update internal links to that link to this file? And the answer is yes, actually I do. Always update. This is pretty much something I always want to do. And so now if I go back to my original note, I can see the file name is updated and everything is good. Now, one other thing I'll typically do with this is I will create a folder, and I'll create it either in the root or in one of my subfolders. Like I've said in other videos, how you do this is up to you. If I have embedded resources, I'll create a folder of some name like this, and I'll just drop this in there. So whenever I paste in other images, they'll just get paste it in, I'll rename them, and then I'll put them in this embedded folder. Another thing you're often going to want to do as you're reading through these chapters and making notes is you're going to want to extract quotes. Now you can put the quotes directly into the notes for the chapter. That's something I'm very often doing. However, sometimes I want to take those notes and make a specific note about them. Why would I do that? Well, sometimes it's really significant and I want to extract it. And sometimes it's because I will maybe want to reference that note from different places. And so maybe I'll want to use it in different presentations, or it's just a very commonly referenced quote. And so I'm going to see it a lot of places. And so the example today that I'm going to use is totally going to fall into that particular category. And it is this particular quote. Socrates said during his trial in the Apology, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Now, that's not the full quote. Let's go create it. Now, when I create quotes, what I'll typically do, and this is just my way of doing things, is I will usually create a separate folder for these small textual references. And that's because I do a lot of these. I do them from Plato, I do them from the Bible, I do them from whatever. And so I just have a different category, and I'll call this text ref, right? Short for text references. You can name it whatever you want. You can put this in with your regular notes, whatever you want to do. Okay, so let's create that. Now, this particular saying comes from Plato's Apology. And it comes from Plato's Apology 38a. So I'm going to make a note in here. And it's going to be Plato, or Plat, Apol, because I'll typically use abbreviations for the names of these works, 38a. All right, so what's the quote? I am actually going to bring in more of the quote than what is often referenced, and that's because it just gives me a little bit more context. In the context of the Apology, this is Socrates talking to the jury about discussing virtue, all right? And it's put in a hypothetical, and I actually take it out of the hypothetical just like everyone does. But I put this first part in there as well. I say that it is the greatest good for a man to discuss virtue every day. The unexamined life is not worth living. So the quote, the very common quote, the unexamined life is not worth living, specifically given in the context of discussing virtue and discussing virtue with others, with the idea that, you know what, we should discuss virtue to make sure we think and do the right things, because the unexamined life is not worth living. So now that I've got that, I can go back to my Martin, Ancient Greece, go down here, and I can link to that. Now, how can I do that? Plato, Apology, 38a. There's my note. This works just fine. What you can also do is the following. Put the pipe character, put the text in, and now the link appears as that piece of text, because that reference might not mean much to you. But the text itself, the unexamined life, is not worth living. That makes it really easy to know what we're talking about, what we're looking at. And of course, if you go and you put your cursor on it, it'll open up, and so you can see actually what's the file name. That's on the left, and the right name is the explanatory text. Okay. Having done all of that, let's look at the graph. The graph? What's the graph? Well, if you go over to the left, you will see an option that says Open Graph View. All right, Open Graph View. What is this? Graph View in Obsidian is a way of visualizing your notes and how they connect. I see here all my notes, actually. I can see Socrates. He is linked to Crito of Alopece. He is linked to Martin, Ancient Greece. He is linked to notes from the book by the name of Crito that Plato wrote. Okay, neat. I can also see that, oh, here is that note we made in a previous video about how we should listen to the wise and not the mob. And how is that linked to Socrates? Well, it's a note that comes out of Plato's Crito, which is related to Socrates. And we can also see our Plato Apology 38a, the unexamined life is not worth living. That is linked to from Martin, ancient Greece. Now, I can see in this that I've got some things I can improve in my linking. I've got this presentation file and sample note from previous videos. I'm not going to worry about that. But I can see that Coursera over here is just sort of alone. I made a mistake. I created the note. That's good. All good. But I never actually linked to it from my book. So let's go back to ancient Greece, Martin. And now I've linked Coursera. And so now Coursera is linked to that, and I can see that here in the graph view. It's nice and updated. What else? Well, what about Alcibiades? Well, is Alcibiades linked to Socrates? Actually, yes, he is. And so let's go and find Alcibiades. Alcibiades was a student of Socrates. And so now our graph view is updated. We can see these connections here. Now these kind of cross, the graph view is going to render somewhat randomly and reposition itself as you change things. And so you've got this weird crossing. This is actually, these notes are not connected to the others. That just happens to be how the graph rendered it at this particular time. So anyway, here's the graph. This is useful for looking at your notes and thinking, what is all connected? Socrates is connecting most of our notes at this point. He's kind of in the center of everything. And then, of course, you've got the ancient Greece book there. Okay, so that's the graph. This can be a useful way of looking at your notes. Okay, so what have we done? We've outlined a part of a book. There is value in note-taking for learning and studying. Obsidian is great for that. But if you're just taking notes, you can make them in a book you're reading, like in the margins, assuming you own it, or in a physical book. But Obsidian gives you this ability to link, which you don't get from annotating in a book or a physical notebook. All right? This is much better. This allows you to link things, allows you to visualize these links and jump between things. As you read, outline, create notes, and link them, the value of the information in your notes goes up. Why? Because random bits of unconnected data is just information. Better understanding and knowledge comes from understanding relationships and linking data, which Obsidian makes easy. It's harder to do if you're just making notes in the margins of books. If you have any questions, comments, or requests, please put them in the comments below. If you found the video useful, please like it and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Until next time, hit the books and start taking some notes.